On the 1st of May 1945, inside the bombed-out ruins of the Reich Chancellery Garden, the Gauleiter of Berlin, Joseph Goebbels, and his wife Magda stood hand in hand, near to a bomb crater where the charred remains of their former dictator were smouldering. What happened next is rather unclear, but the result was that days later, the charred remains of the Goebbels couple were discovered by the Soviet Red Army and were then paraded in front of the cameras in a morbid spectacle that showed the world what happened to the former leaders of the Third Reich. Joseph Goebbels' corpse was burned not very well, and it was quite clearly still recognisable. But this was not the end of the story for his remains and body, as it wasn't until 25 years later that the corpse of Hitler's propaganda minister were dealt with once and for all. Goebbels, as a figure inside of Berlin, tried to rally the citizens of the city to fight and give their lives for the crumbling empire in the face of a Soviet enemy that would take no prisoners. Yet he, despite this, took the easy way out himself. In this video we look at what happened when the Soviets discovered the body of Joseph Goebbels and what they found. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The name Goebbels is one which is synonymous with the evils of the Third Reich. He rose to prominence with Adolf Hitler and was someone who was incredibly devoted to Hitler years before he came into power. Goebbels' true skill was that he understood the changing world and the times of the 20th century and the power that mass media could have on culture. As a young boy he had a very strict Catholic upbringing, but when World War I broke out he wanted to fight for Germany, but was refused this because he had a club foot, which affected his mobility, and more on this club foot later. Goebbels rose throughout the Nazi Party, and he became the Nazi Gauleiter, or regional leader for Berlin. He built the organisation from the ground up in the city, and became a master of propaganda and mass media. He created his own newspaper, titled Der Angriff, or The Assault, and perpetuated anti-communist and anti-Semitic statements in this to try and further Hitler's dictatorship. He then, in 1928, became an elected member of the German parliament. He liked to use huge spectacle, and Hitler was so impressed that he was made the head of propaganda for the whole party. Goebbels pioneered the use of film and radio for these purposes, producing huge amounts of films of Nazi rallies and also distributing Hitler's speeches to spread the word. One of his earliest triumphs saw Hitler be flown all over Germany to do multiple speeches in one day. After Hitler came into power, Goebbels was made the youngest minister in his cabinet at the age of just 35. He continued to control the press and media, and everything became geared around the Nazi policies. Anti-Semitic films were made, libraries were censored of books, and authors had their books burned in huge public spectacles. Goebbels was also behind much of the attacks against Jewish people in Germany on the 9th of November 1938, which became known as Kristallnacht. He was at his core one of Hitler's best friends, and the pair often travelled and spent time together. Goebbels' wife Magda became Hitler's closest confidant too, but Joseph was a love rat, and was someone who manipulated women into sleeping with him. Some of the most desirable film actresses of the time were coerced into this by Goebbels for movie parts, and he even struck up a relationship with a Czech actress that led to Hitler stepping in, as his Minister of Propaganda wanted to divorce his wife and then run off with the actress. As the Nazis increased their stranglehold in Germany, Goebbels continued to ramp up the propaganda, targeting persecuted people, and as the Second World War broke out, he had a very valuable and important job in trying to keep the morale of the nation high, despite defeats at the Battle of Stalingrad. Goebbels called for total war, and remained defiant that the Germans would win publicly until the very end. But he remained in Berlin as things were coming to an end for the Reich in Europe. On the 23rd of April 1945, he made a final speech to the people of Berlin saying, "I call on you to fight for your city, fight with everything you have got, for the sake of your wives and children, your mothers and your parents. Your arms are defending everything we have held dear, and all the generations that will come after us. Be proud and courageous, be inventive and cunning. Your Gauleiter is amongst you. The battle for Berlin must become the signal for the whole nation to rise up in battle." He remained inside of the Führer bunker, Hitler's underground complex of rooms and his concrete bunker under the Reich Chancellery, and with this he saw the final days of Hitler's life play out. Goebbels was a witness to Eva Braun and Hitler's marriage on the 29th of April, and he then heard the gunshot the following day from the study after Hitler had shot himself. Following Hitler's death, Goebbels became very depressed, and he walked around the garden of the Reich Chancellery, hoping for a Soviet shell to hit him and bring his life to an end. It would have saved him a job after all, and it was claimed about Goebbels that, he said, "It is such a pity that such a man, as in Hitler, is not with us any longer, but there is nothing to be done. For us, everything is lost now, and the only way out, left for us, is the one Hitler chose. I shall follow his example." In the aftermath of Hitler's death, Goebbels became the Chancellor of the Reich, and he carried out his only act, offering a ceasefire, but this was rejected. On the afternoon of the 1st of May 1945, Goebbels was seen by his adjutant for the last time, and he was offered a breakout attempt, but turned this down. It was claimed he said that, "The captain must not leave his sinking ship. I have thought about it all and decided to stay here. I have nowhere to go because with little children I will not be able to make it, especially with a leg like mine." His wife had already arranged for the children to be killed, and this happened whilst they were sedated in their beds. At roughly 8:30 p.m. that evening, Joseph and Magda Goebbels walked out of the Führerbunker's emergency exit and into the garden of the Reich Chancellery. What happened next is not very clear. One account says they bit down on cyanide capsules and then were shot by an SS officer in the head. Another was that Goebbels shot himself and his wife consumed the poison, and another claims that Goebbels may have even shot his wife. Nonetheless, their bodies were shot at after by an SS officer to ensure they were in fact dead. After this, the bodies were covered in petrol, and this was then ignited in the same way that Hitler's body was burned, but there was not enough fuel, and what was actually left were only partially cremated remains. Joseph's body was so poorly burned that he was actually still recognisable. The bodies were discovered by the Soviets a few days later, and they were identified by captured Nazis, including Goebbels' adjutant. Goebbels' body was truly a mess. His small stature was instantly recognisable, as was his face. His face was not burned properly, and some of the clothes that he had been wearing were still on his body. His arms were raised up, presumably this was caused by the fire and the heat, and what was also found was his club foot on his leg, and this still remained. When the bodies were autopsied, the Soviets found that the right foot sole is twisted inwards to such a degree that it stands virtually at a right angle to the leg bone. It was also stated that it is noted that the man is of small stature, his right foot in a semi-folded position in a charred orthopaedic shoe, and on his body were found the remains of an NSDAP party uniform and a party badge damaged by fire. By the head of two corpses lay 2 Volta pistols. The body of Joseph Goebbels was photographed and displayed alongside the corpses of his wife and children, and after this they were placed in coffins and then were taken through different German towns until they ended up within the confines of a Schmerz facility in Magdeburg. They were buried near to where waste disposal bins were kept, and also placed in these graves were the remains of Hitler, Eva Braun and the others who died inside the Führer bunker. They were left there for 25 years, and the world did not know where the bodies were and what happened to them. But on the 24th of April 1970, a KGB team exhumed the bodies and they discovered the wooden coffins, and they intended to get rid of the bodies once and for all, before they handed the facility back over to the Germans. The coffin of Joseph Goebbels was found and taken out of the grave, and this was taken on the back of a Soviet truck to a nearby crematorium. It was then cremated and burned, and the ashes were then scattered in the Biederitz River. So the coffin of Joseph Goebbels was dug up 25 years after it had been buried in secret by the Soviets following the autopsy being performed, and after this his body had been placed on display and photographed. The creepy images of his corpse remained in the media in the aftermath of the Second World War, and they told the story of the crumbling dictatorship and Reich and what happened to one of the worst war criminals. Goebbels was instrumental to Hitler's cult of personality and the spread of the policies that led to the suffering of so many people. But in death, despite ordering the people of Berlin, his city, to fight and lay down their lives for the Nazi cause, he would not do so, and he inside the Reich Chancellery Garden decided to die by his own hand. But but what happened to his remains immediately after was horrifying. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.